Welcome back to Talk Tickers, the show where we unpack earnings calls and help you figure out what's really going on. Today we're diving into Eli Lilly's Q3 2024 earnings call. And I gotta say, the results, they're a bit of a head scratcher.
Yeah, it's a real puzzle. It seems like they're firing on all cylinders, incredible revenue growth, a really strong pipeline, and they're pouring billions into expanding production. But the market didn't seem too impressed. The stock actually took a pretty big hit after the call, down over 6%. So what gives? What's spooking investors? Well, that's exactly what we're here to unravel today.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. Paint a picture for our listeners. Lilly posted a 42% increase in revenue for Q3, which is huge. And that's excluding the impact of their divested olanzapine portfolio. So this isn't just some accounting trickery. This is real growth. And they were very clear that this growth wasn't just driven by Monjaro and Zepbound, their blockbuster diabetes and weight loss drugs.
Right, those are definitely the stems of the show. But
yeah,
they also saw really healthy growth in other parts of the business, what they call non-incretin revenue, that was up a respectable 17%.
So a lot to celebrate on the surface, but like you said, there's always a but, right?
There is, and a lot of the analyst questions during the call really zeroed in on what Eli Lilly called lumpiness in their channel stocking, and this was particularly noticeable with Monjaro and Zepbound.
So what does that even mean, lumpiness in channel stocking? I mean, is this something investors should be concerned about?
Well, think of it like this. In Q2, there was this big push to really stock up inventory, get those distribution channels nice and full, and then in Q3, there was a bit of a drawdown. So it's not that demand suddenly disappeared. It's more about the timing of when those sales are actually recorded.
So it's more of an accounting quirk than a sign of weakness in the market.
Exactly. And the underlying demand for these medications, particularly Monjaro and Zepbound, it's still incredibly strong. In fact, U.S. prescription volume for those drugs grew 25% just from the previous quarter, which is phenomenal.
Wow, 25%. Remarkable. And they're actively working to make these drugs even more accessible, right? They launched a single-dose Zepbound vial through Lilly Direct, their direct-to-consumer channel.
That's right. They're really trying to make it as easy as possible for patients to get their hands on these medications.
And speaking of access, that brings us to a topic that's been generating a lot of buzz lately, compounded semaglutide. With these reports of shortages, we're seeing some patients turning to these custom-made versions, which aren't subject to the same FDA regulations as the commercially manufactured drugs.
Yeah.
And Lilly's CEO, David Ricks, he actually addressed this directly during the call.
Yeah, he did. And I found it really interesting that he didn't seem overly concerned about the financial impact of compounding on their business. I mean, you might expect them to be worried about losing market share, but he really focused on patient safety. He emphasized the potential risks associated with these unregulated products.
So they're not sweating the competition, but they are sounding the alarm about potential safety issues.
That's it in a nutshell. And they didn't just raise concerns, they actually offered a potential solution. Ricks suggested that closer collaboration between regulators like the FDA and pharmaceutical companies could actually help get legitimate products to patients faster and address any real shortages that exist.
So they're basically saying, hey, we're ramping up production as fast as we can, but if the FDA could maybe streamline the approval process a little, we could get these medications to the people who need them even sooner.
Exactly. It's a really delicate balance they're trying to strike. They need to rapidly increase the supply of tirzepatide, which is the key ingredient in both Monjaro and Zepbound, but they also need to manage demand really carefully.
Because if they create all this hype and then people can't actually get the medication, that's going to lead to a lot of frustration.
Absolutely. You don't want to promise something you can't deliver, especially in a market as sensitive as this one. They actually had to pull back on some of their marketing efforts earlier this year just to avoid that very scenario.
Wow, that's a really tough position to be in. But now that supply is improved, they're starting to ramp up those demand generation efforts again, but very strategically.
Right. They're playing the long game here. They're betting big on the future of these incretin drugs, but they're also very aware of the need to carefully synchronize supply and demand.
Makes sense. But let's not forget that Eli Lilly is more than just Monjaro and Zepbound. They have a pretty diverse portfolio, and some other areas of their business are doing exceptionally well, too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
For example, in oncology, they saw a 32% increase in worldwide sales of Verzenio, their breast cancer drug. That's significant.
It really is, and that's one of the things that makes this earnings call so interesting. They're not a one-trick pony. They have a strong and diverse portfolio, which is something investors usually love to see. So Why the negative reaction? It's a bit of a head-scratcher.
Yeah, it is. So besides the incretin drug frenzy, were there any other bright spots in the earnings report? Any other exciting developments or new product launches?
Definitely. There were a couple of noteworthy wins. For instance, Ebglyss, their new treatment for atopic dermatitis, just got FDA approval.
Oh, wow. That's
Entering a pretty competitive market, but early data suggests it could be a real contender in the long run.
And that's a testament to the breadth of their research and development efforts. They're not just a one-hit wonder.
Not at all.
So speaking of R&D, what's the latest on their Alzheimer's drug Donanemab? I know they've been making some headlines in that area.
Yeah, Donanemab has been showing some really promising results in clinical trials. They're currently working on a modified dosing regimen to address some safety concerns, but they're expecting to file for regulatory approval pretty soon.
That could be a real game changer for them if it gets approved. Both from a humanitarian standpoint and financially, Alzheimer's is a massive unmet medical need.
No doubt about it. But it's also important to remember that Alzheimer's drug development has been a tough road for a lot of companies. It's a really complex disease, and a lot of promising therapies have stumbled in those late-stage trials. So it's still a bit of a wait-and-see situation.
Yeah, fingers crossed on that one.
Yeah.
So we've talked about their performance, their pipeline, but what about their long-term strategy? They keep mentioning expanding production. Are they actually putting their money where their mouth is?
Oh, they're all in on this. They just announced almost $2 billion in investments to expand their manufacturing footprint in Ireland. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Since 2020, they've committed over $20 billion to building, upgrading, and acquiring manufacturing facilities all over the world.
$20 billion. That's a serious commitment.
It is. It's a clear sign that they're anticipating huge demand for their products.
And it's not just about building factories. They're also investing in the science behind how they make these medications more efficiently and effectively right.
You got it. They announced a $4.5 billion investment in something they're calling the Lilly Medicine Foundry. It's a cutting-edge R&D facility that's focused on the design and development of manufacturing processes for new medicines.
So they're not just trying to pump out more of the same. They're investing in the future of drug manufacturing itself. That's a bold move.
Yeah.
It tells me they have a very full pipeline, and they're expecting even more breakthroughs down the road.
Yeah, that's definitely the message they're sending. But here's the million-dollar question. With all this positive news, why did the market react so negatively? We'll dig into that very question when we come back in part 2 of our deep dive into Eli Lilly's Q3 earnings call. Stay tuned.
We'll be right back after a short break.
You know, it's funny how the market sometimes gets so fixated on these little blips, these short-term hiccups, that they miss the bigger picture.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, sure, there were some weird inventory movements that messed with their Q3 revenue a little bit, but that's not exactly unusual when you have a company launching new products as quickly as Lilly. And let's be real, the demand for these medications, especially those incretin drugs, it's through the roof.
It does seem like investors are always looking for instant gratification, like show me the money and show it to me now. But drug development? It's a marathon, not a sprint. It takes years of research and clinical trials. You can't just flip a switch and start raking in the profits.
Exactly. And to their credit, Lilly's investing heavily to make sure they can actually meet that demand down the road. This massive manufacturing expansion they're undertaking. It's not just about throwing money at the problem. They're making a strategic bet on the future. They're building capacity to make these life-changing medications available to millions more people.
So are investors overreacting then? I mean, a 6% drop in the stock price, that seems pretty dramatic for a company that's performing this well and has such a bright future.
Well, it's possible. I think it often comes down to uncertainty and risk tolerance. Investors, they don't like unknowns. And with new product launches, there are always questions. Will the drugs live up to the hype? Will there be unexpected side effects? Will they be able to keep up with demand? Investors tend to bake those uncertainties into the stock price, and that can lead to some volatility.
And we can't forget about the competition either. Novo Nordisk is a major player in the diabetes and obesity market, and they're not just sitting on the sidelines. They're developing their own oral semaglutide, and they're coming for Lilly's market share.
Absolutely. Competition always adds another layer of complexity to the equation. Investors are probably wondering if Lilly can maintain their first-mover advantage, especially as these rivals start rolling out their own competing therapies.
And then there's the elephant in the room, the Inflation Reduction Act. We're still waiting to see exactly how that's all going to shake out, but the possibility of government price negotiations on certain drugs, it's a big concern for the entire industry. Investors are understandably worried about how that could impact the pricing and profitability of blockbuster drugs like Monjaro and Zepbound.
Oh yeah, the IRA is a wild card. It's creating a lot of uncertainty, and that always makes investors nervous.
So we've got short-term volatility driven by these inventory fluctuations, intensifying competition, and this looming threat of regulatory change. Anything else that could be contributing to the stock's dip?
One thing that some analysts pointed out was that Lilly didn't provide any specific financial guidance for 2025. Investors love having a clear roadmap. They want to know where the company's headed and how they plan to deal with any potential obstacles. So this lack of guidance, it kind of created a vacuum, and speculation rushed in to fill it.
It's like they're saying, just trust us, we've got this.
Mm.
But in the stock market, trust is often built on transparency and predictability.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's shift gears a bit and dig into some of the more specific details that came out during the earnings call. What really stood out to you?
Well, I was particularly interested in what they had to say about Donanemab, their Alzheimer's drug candidate. They presented some really encouraging data at a recent Alzheimer's conference, and it seems like they're making real progress in addressing those safety concerns, especially with this modified dosing regimen they're working on.
That's a big deal. Alzheimer's is a devastating disease, and there's such a huge need for effective treatments. If Lilly can pull this off, it would be a monumental breakthrough, not just for patients, but for the company as well.
Absolutely. A successful Alzheimer's drug would be a game changer for them. But we also need to be realistic. Alzheimer's drug development has a long history of disappointments. A lot of promising therapies have failed in late-stage trials. So while the early data for Donanemab looks really good, it's still a high-risk, high-reward situation.
Right. So fingers crossed on that one. But speaking of risks, we've talked about the competition from Novo Nordisk. Are there any other players in the diabetes and obesity space that Lilly needs to be worried about?
Oh, definitely. These markets are getting more and more crowded. We're seeing everyone from big pharma giants to these nimble little biotech startups trying to get a piece of the action. Companies like Amgen, Boehringer, Ingelheim, they're all developing their own GLP-1 receptor agonists and combination therapies that could challenge Lilly's position.
Okay, so it's not just about being first to market anymore. It's about staying ahead of the curve and constantly finding ways to improve and differentiate your products.
Exactly. The pace of innovation in this space is incredible, and Lilly can't afford to get complacent. They need to keep pouring resources into R&D, expanding their portfolio, and finding new ways to add value for patients and healthcare providers.
And that's where investments like the Lilly Medicine Foundry come in. They're building the infrastructure and expertise they need to stay ahead of the game in this rapidly evolving landscape.
It's a smart strategy. They're not just betting on individual products, they're investing in the science and technology that will drive the next wave of breakthroughs.
So here we have this company with amazing financial performance, groundbreaking products, and a bold vision for the future. But they're also facing some serious challenges. Volatile markets, fierce competition, and a shifting regulatory landscape. It's a classic tale of risk and reward playing out on a global scale.
It really is. And that's what makes it so fascinating to follow. Will Eli Lilly be able to keep this incredible growth going as they scale up production, deal with pricing pressures, and fight off the competition? Or will these obstacles prove too much for them to overcome? It's a question investors will be wrestling with for a long time. But here's the key takeaway. Lilly's success ultimately hinges on one thing: their ability to deliver innovative, life-changing therapies to patients.
That's a great point. It's easy to get lost in the financial numbers and the market analysis. But at the end of the day, the pharmaceutical industry is about improving human health and well-being. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've examined the ins and outs of Lilly's business, explored the reasons behind the market's reaction, and peered into the future of this complex and ever-changing industry.
And we're not finished yet. The big question is still hanging in the air. Can Lilly maintain this incredible growth? We'll tackle that very question and wrap up our deep dive when we come back in part 3. So stick with us.
Right, we're back and ready to tackle the big question that's been looming over this entire conversation. Can Eli Lilly sustain this incredible growth trajectory they've been on?
Well, it's the question everyone's asking. And the answer, as with most things in the world of pharmaceuticals, isn't exactly simple. On the one hand, you have this company with an amazing portfolio of innovative drugs. They've got a proven track record of launching successful products, and they've got the financial firepower to keep investing in cutting-edge research and development. They're making a killing with Monjaro and now Zepbound, and as we discussed earlier, their pipeline is bursting with potential new treatments for everything from Alzheimer's to cancer. I mean, it's pretty impressive.
No doubt about that. But you mentioned earlier that success often breeds competition. So how much of a threat are these competitors to Lilly's continued growth?
It's definitely something they need to keep a close eye on. The diabetes and obesity markets are getting more and more crowded, and these rival companies are hungry for market share.
Hmm.
Lilly's going to have to stay ahead of the curve, constantly improving their products, exploring new ways to deliver those products, and maybe even thinking about some strategic partnerships to stay competitive. They can't just sit back and assume their current success is going to last forever.
It's like a high-stakes game of chess, right?
Yeah.
Every move matters, and if you slip up even a little bit, your opponent could take advantage.
Exactly. And it's not just about outsmarting the competition on the science and technology front. They also have to navigate this constantly shifting regulatory landscape, especially now with the Inflation Reduction Act looming over everything, the possibility of government price negotiations on certain drugs. It's a whole new ballgame.
It's a tricky situation. They need to invest billions of dollars to develop these groundbreaking medications, but at the same time, they're facing pressure to make those medications affordable and accessible. So no wonder investors are a bit on edge.
That uncertainty is definitely reflected in the stock price. I mean, despite their strong performance, the market seems to be taking this wait-and-see approach. They want more clarity on Lilly's long-term plans. How are they going to weather these storms?
So taking all of that into consideration, what's your overall take? Are you bullish or bearish on Eli Lilly?
Well, if I had to put it into one category, I'd say I'm cautiously optimistic. They have all the right pieces in place for continued success: innovative products, a robust pipeline, and a commitment to investing in the future. But they're also facing some pretty significant challenges that can't be ignored.
It's the classic high-risk, high-reward scenario, I guess.
Yeah.
For investors, it all comes down to how much risk they're willing to take and how much they believe in Lilly's ability to execute their vision.
Absolutely. The next few years are going to be critical for them. They need to show that they can scale up production effectively, that they can manage demand strategically, that they can navigate the changing regulatory environment, and most importantly, that they can continue to deliver on the promise of their pipeline.
And a lot of that hinges on the success or failure of their late-stage drug candidates, particularly Donanemab, their Alzheimer's treatment. Success in that market with such a huge unmet need that could really launch Lilly to a whole new level, but failure could have a major impact on their future growth.
Absolutely. Donanemab is a big gamble, but it's a gamble with the potential to change millions of lives. If they can prove that it's both safe and effective in larger trials, that would be a monumental achievement.
So for our listeners who are trying to wrap their heads around this earnings call and figure out what it all means for the future of Eli Lilly, what are the key things they should be paying attention to? What should they be watching for as the story continues to develop?
Well, I'd say keep an eye on their progress in scaling up manufacturing and making their key medications more widely available. Keep tabs on the competition, especially as new players enter the market with similar or potentially better therapies. Pay attention to any developments related to the Inflation Reduction Act and how it impacts drug pricing. And most importantly, don't forget the human element. Behind all the financial data and market analysis, there are real people whose lives are directly affected by these medications. Lilly's true success won't just be measured by their stock price, it'll be measured by their ability to make a real difference in the lives of patients.
Very well said. This has been a fascinating and thought-provoking deep dive into Eli Lilly's Q3 earnings call. We've analyzed their financial performance, dissected the market's reaction, and explored the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. Like always, it seems like we've ended up with more questions than answers, and this story, it's far from over.
Yeah, that's the nature of the game, I guess. The future of Eli Lilly and really the entire pharmaceutical industry. It's being shaped by forces both inside and outside their control. It's a dynamic, complex, and often unpredictable world. But hey, that's what makes it so interesting to follow, right?
Absolutely. And we'll be here to help you make sense of it all as it unfolds. So thank you for joining us on Talk Tickers. We always appreciate having you here with us.
Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, stay informed, stay curious, and we'll catch you next time for another deep dive into the world of earnings calls.